Hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope you are all doing very well. So students, today we are going to start the chapter of the political science, class 11th, the chapter which is known as executive. The executive is the main and important part of the government, and in this chapter we will discuss about the definitions of the executive, what we basically means by the executive. Then we are going to discuss about the types of the executives, what are the different types of the executives and which type of executive exists in India. We'll discuss about that also. And thereafter we'll discuss the various posts that are mentioned in the constitution and which collectively form the executive branch of the Indian government. So in this particular lecture, I will describe the format of the chapter, the points of the chapter, what are the points which are included in this particular chapters, and then in ensuing chapters or in the ensuing lectures, I will discuss that point one by one. So first of all, we're going to discuss about the executive branch, and the first point is that we are going to describe about the format of the chapter. So if you look at the NCERT, the chapter 4 is known as the executive. It deals with the executive branch of the government. But before starting the lecture or before going to the in details of the chapter, we'll have to look around some key concept of the chapter. I always start the chapters with the introduction, because in introduction I always mention some key concepts which are necessary to understand the entire chapter. The first point is about the introduction. In introduction, we'll understand the three organs of the government, or about three organs of the government. What is the concept of three organs? This concept is basically depends on the separation of power. It is a doctrine of separation of power, and the modern thinkers have elaborated that if we divide or separate the powers, then it is easy to run a democracy. So this concept is based on that form. Three organs of the government basically means the legislative organs, the executive organ, and the judiciary organ. The legislature basically means that which legislate the laws or which formulates the laws. The second one is the executive branch of the government, which enforce the laws. And third one is the judiciary, which actually evaluate the laws or interpret the laws. So this is the three organs of the government. And if you look at the NCERT, then chapter 4 deals with the executive, chapter 5 deals with the legislature, and chapter 6 deals with the judiciary. So one by one we are going to discuss all of them. So first of all, we'll know the concept of the three organs of the government in a bit detail about what are the three organs and what are their work in the introduction. The second point in the introduction will be about relating these three organs or this entire chapter with the Indian Constitution. Why we are relating these three chapters or three organs with the Indian Constitution? If you look at the part 5 of the Indian Constitution, see, our Constitution is divided into 22 parts, around 395 articles and 8 schedules in its original form. So in that 22 parts, the part 5 deals with the union. In that union part, there is part about the executive, about the judiciary as well, and about the legislature as well. So I will elaborate the articles which deals with these part of the governments. Like from article 52 to 62, it deals with the president, it is the part of an executive, and then further deals with the vice president, it is also the part of the executive. So one by one I will elaborate that which articles mention about which part and about the which organ of the government. So in the second point of the introduction, we are going to discuss this. After discussing the Indian Constitution, the three organs of the government, I'll give you some idea about the structure of Indian executive. If you look at the Indian executive or various posts that are mentioned in the Constitution which forms the executive branch, they are in the top. It is the president, then the vice president, then the prime minister. Yes, the prime minister is also the part of an executive. Then the councils of ministers, the council of ministers are also the part of the executive. And then we are going to discuss the permanent executive or the bureaucracy. These all forms the executive of the India. So one by one I'll write the name of the Indian executive post in this particular point. So first point will be about the introduction. After discussing about the introduction, then we'll come to the second point, and the second point deals with the what is executive. Now the second point, discuss the point, what is executive? What is executive? In this particular point, we will first define the executive or definition of the executive. Whenever we define any word, we get some boundaries regarding to that word, and the concept regarding to that particular point became somehow clear about that. So what is executive? It is basically a branch of the government that deals with the day-to-day administration and also deals with the implementation of the laws and policies which are formulated by the legislature. So the work of formulation is in hands of the legislature, but the work of implementation and looking after day-to-day administration is in the hands of the executive. But remember, the executive is not limited up to the government. You can find any executive branch in any private organization as well, but here we are discussing our constitution and government, so we will basically describe and define it in the terms of the government. So first is the definition of the executive, and in the second point will deal with the what are the basic functions of an executive in a government branch. Basically, the function will be about the implementation of laws, looking after day-to-day administration. These are the basic functions of the executive. So in the first 2 points, we are going to discuss about the introduction and then what is executive. Later, in the third point, we are going to discuss about the types of the executive. See, there are many types of executives, and according to it varies from factors to factors. But here we will discuss the types of executive depend upon the leadership. So the third point will deal with the types of the executive, which depends upon the leadership. So let's go to the third point, and the third point basically deals with the types of the executive. When it's come to the types of the executive, we can broadly classify it into 2 parts. What are these 2 parts? So the third point will deal with the types of executive. Now, when we are dividing or looking at the types of the executive, then first the concept is about the leadership. We are discussing the types of executive dependent on the leadership. The first principle is about the collective leadership. This first type of executive can be classified as the executive system based on collective leadership. The executive system based on collective leadership. What does it means, the collective leadership? It simply means the executive branch have 2 posts. Which post? One is the Prime Minister and another one will be the President. It means that the head of the state and head of the government, there will be 2 separate posts. One will be of the head of the government, which is basically a Prime Minister, and another post is the head of the state, which will be a President, or it can be a monarch as well. How? We will discuss about this as well. In this form or in this principle, the executive system based on the collective leadership, or the executive system which is based on the principle of collective leadership, is again classified into different forms. The first form is about the parliamentary executive. This parliamentary executive exists in India. Parliamentary executive. What does this mean? In the parliamentary executive, there is a head of the government as well as there is a head of the state. There are 2 different posts. In this parliamentary executive, the head of the government is basically a Prime Minister everywhere, and the head of the state can be a monarch, or the head of the state can be a president. A country can be democratic, but a country cannot be republic. Like the example is the United Kingdoms. If you look at the system of the United Kingdoms, you will find that the parliamentary executive exists in that particular country. But if you look at the head of the government, it is the Prime Minister, which is elected by the people. But if you look at the head of the state, it is still a monarch. King Charles is the present head of the United Kingdoms. So we can consider or call it a monarchy or a constitutional monarchy which have a parliamentary executive system. So this is based on the collective leadership. It means 2 leaders are running the whole country. One is the nominal head and one is the real head. The real head basically executes the real power. The nominal head has basically nominal powers. So here we will discuss that what is the parliamentary executive, and it can be further classified into 2 parts, the monarch. can be the head of the state, or the president can be the head of state. When the president is head of the state, you can consider the example of the India. In India, the president is the head of the state and prime minister is the head of the government. We have basically collective leadership. There are two posts which are running the country. First system is based on this. Another system within this collective leadership is about the semi-presidential executive. Now, what is semi-presidential executive? In the parliamentary executive, the real powers are vested in the prime minister. It means in a parliamentary executive, the prime minister is more powerful as compared to the president or the monarch who is the head of the state. The head of the state has only nominal powers, but the prime minister has real powers, and real powers are vested in the prime minister and the council of the minister. But this is not the concept in the semi-presidential executive. But semi-presidential executive also have the collective leadership. It means there will be a prime minister as well as president in semi-presidential executive as well. But the real powers are vested in the president, not in the prime minister. For example, if you look at the France or if you look at the Russia, there are both prime minister as well as president. But in Russia, president is more powerful than prime minister, as well as in the France, the president is more powerful than the prime minister. So these all systems are known as semi-presidential executive. If you look at our neighboring country Sri Lanka, it also has semi-presidential executive. So basically, the first type of executive principle is based on the collective leadership, and then collective leadership is further divided into the parliamentary executive and semi-presidential executive. It means there are two posts. In which the prime minister is more powerful, it is known as parliamentary executive, and in which the president is more powerful, it is known as semi-presidential executive. So this is the first type of executive that we will talk about in this chapter, the collective leadership. Now, there are also executives which depends on the individual leadership as well. Likewise, as in United States of America, you won't find the post like prime minister. You will find only one post like which is called president. So if we look at the second type in this A point, and the B point is about the executive, or we can write that the executive system based on individual leadership. And this is known as presidential executive. It simply means presidential executive. What does it mean? It means that president will be the head of the government as well as the president will be the head of the state. President is the head of the government as well as the head of the state. It means both of these posts are given to the single person, which is known as the presidential executive. So when we classify the executive, it will be based on the collective leadership, another one will be based on the individual leadership. When it comes to the collective leadership, there is a parliamentary form of the government and also semi-presidential form of the government. In parliamentary form of the government, prime minister vested with the real powers, and in semi-presidential executive, the president is vested with the real powers. And then comes the executive, which is based on the individual leadership. In individual leadership, it is known as presidential executive. So presidential executive examples is the United States of America, Brazil can be another example, and many Latin American countries are dependent or they have the presidential executive. But sometimes we can consider that why different countries have different forms of executive. It basically depends upon their history, their struggles, their freedom and their freedom struggles, and about the concept which they go through during their phase of their struggles. So it is entirely dependent upon their own history and their own society as well. So the parliamentary executive and semi-presidential executive and the presidential executive. One by one we will discuss about them in the point 3rd of this chapter. After discussing the types of executive, which kind of executive exists in India, then it is the parliamentary executive with the head president. India chooses the parliamentary executive system, the executive which will be based on the collective leadership, but there will be a parliament, there will be a president as well, there will be a prime minister as well. So we choose the parliamentary executive system. Now in the last and the 4th point, we will discuss about what is the Indian parliamentary executive system and what are the various posts that are related to the Indian parliamentary system. Now the 4th point, The fourth point basically deals with the, now if you look at the fourth point, the parliamentary executive in India. Now here comes a question, why India chooses the parliamentary executive and why we don't choose the presidential executive. So the makers of our constitution were aware about the word which is known as the personality cult. In the presidential form of executive, there is a fear of the personality cult, which they wanted to avoid it while making these posts or making some provisions about this post. In the Indian constitution, they mention about the parliamentary executive. It means it will be based on the collective leadership. There will be a prime minister, there will be a president. Both of will run the country. The president will be the nominal head of the country, and prime minister will execute or will have the real powers with the of the executive. So India chooses the parliamentary executive because our constitution makers want a sensitive government which will be responsible, which will be accountable there to their own people, and accountability is more or less better in a parliamentary executive form. That's why we choose the parliamentary executive, because there is always the fear of personality cult in the presidential executive. So we don't opt for the presidential executive, but we opt for the parliamentary executive for making a responsible government, for making an accountable government of our country, and making also a sensitive government for the country. So the parliamentary executive of the India. If we look at the parliamentary executive, various posts which come under the parliamentary executive, one by one we will discuss about them. The first one is the President of the India. The President of the India is the first citizen of the country, and in the President we will discuss first about the post, then what are the articles related to the President. I will not discuss the entire articles, but the articles which are related to the NCERT, I will mention them. Article 52 to 62 deals with the President of India, and then we will discuss about the powers of the President. The President of India, some people say that President of India has only nominal powers. He doesn't have any real or better power than the Prime Minister. But in some cases, if you look at choosing a Prime Minister in a coalition, the Indian President use his discretion as well. Indian President has the power of the veto as well. There are three types of veto: the absolute veto, suspensive veto, and the pocket veto. And President can use these vetoes with his own discretion. So President also have some good powers. If you look at the Constitution in detail, we will discuss all the veto powers and another powers of the President in this particular point. After discussing the President, we will discuss about the second post, which is related to the executive branch of the Indian government. The second post is the Vice President. Vice President. The articles which are related to the Vice President are from 63 to 71. It deals with the Vice President, the appointment of the Vice President. That Vice President will be the chairman of the Rajya Sabha as well, the term of the Vice President, and many more factors will be discussed in this particular point. After discussing the Vice President, we will come to the third post, which is also an executive post. Now the point C. The point C deals with the Prime Minister. The point C deals with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is also a part of an executive. Now you will say me that Prime Minister, how can Prime Minister be a part of an executive? He sits in the Parliament. Okay, he sits in the Parliament. When he is sitting in the Parliament, he is working as a legislator. He is working to formulating the laws. But when he left the Parliament and goes to the office of the Prime Minister, inside the office of the Prime Minister, he is working as an executive. He is running the country, he is looking after to the day-to-day administration of the country, and after that, whenever there is a session in the Parliament, they will go to the Parliament and are accountable for their works to the Parliament. Understood? The Prime Minister is also a part of the executive. The post is the part of the executive. The person have two different works. One, like Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Whenever he is sitting in his own office of the Prime Minister, he is working as an executive of the country. But when he left the post and went to the sessions of the Parliament, in that particular session, he is basically working as a legislature who will formulate the laws. He is working as an MP inside the Parliament. And he is accountable for his work, whatever he has done at the post of this Prime Minister. So Prime Minister is also a part of the executive. And basically, if we look about the Indian Constitution, then some articles like 74, 75, only 2 or 3 articles mention about the post of the Prime Minister. But we'll get about the all details of the Prime Minister, how someone can become a Prime Minister and what are the qualifications regarding to the Prime Minister. We will look about that as well, and what are the powers of the Prime Minister, because it is one of the most important posts, evenly not one of the most, it is the most important post of the country, surely. And then the D point, the President, Vice President, the Prime Minister, and then the councils of the minister. The council of minister are also the part of the executive. How? Remember, the council of minister are appointed by the President of the India with the aid and advice of the Prime Minister of the India. The council of ministers, whenever the ministers are working in their own ministry, they are working as an executive. Whatever the work they are doing in their ministry, they are accountable in the legislature of the country. When they come to the sessions of the parliament, they are accountable to the public, they are accountable to the country, that what work they have performed in their own ministry. So there is a council of minister also, which is the part of the Indian executive. So in our parliamentary executive, we have the president, the vice president, the prime minister, the councils of the ministers. And councils of ministers are collectively responsible to the legislature. It means that even if a single mistake or even if a no confidence motion is carried out against one minister, then entire council of minister can be removed. So it is basically collectively responsible to the legislature, the council of minister. And the last post, which is we talk about the which is associated with the parliamentary executive, is the permanent executive. The permanent executive. Why we call them permanent executive? Because if you look at the above post, they all are elected, like council of minister, prime minister, vice president and president. All of them are elected for a specific time period, so let's say 5 years. After 5 years, all of them will be removed and new people will come on that who will be declared winner in the election. But there is a branch as well which is known as permanent executive. They doesn't come from the election, but they are selected through various exams like UPSC examinations. So this permanent executive is basically also called as the bureaucracy of the country. The permanent executive runs the day-to-day administration, it enforces the laws, it works in collaboration with the various ministries as well. First, we will discuss and classify the various posts in the permanent executive, then what are the functions of the permanent executive, and then there are some drawbacks also of the permanent executive. Like the red tapeism is a drawback of the permanent executive, corruption is a drawback of a permanent executive, and political interference in the work of permanent executive is also a drawback of the permanent executive. We will discuss all of them in this permanent executive point. At this point, this chapter will be completed, and in the next lecture I will discuss all of these points one by one. So in detail we will discuss about the parliamentary executive in India. In third point we will discuss about types of executive, and in the second point we will discuss about what is executive, and in the first point we will discuss about the introduction. In introduction we will discuss the 3 organs of the Indian government, the structure of the Indian judiciary, and we will relate it to the Indian constitution. So in the next chapter I will discuss these points one by one, from first point, then second point, then third point. Till then, take care, thank you, stay tuned.